and ultimately bringing us to a place of hope. Before we get going, I just want to thank everyone who's inviting their friends. We see a lot of visitors because people are taking invite cards and they're saying, we want to see everyone lead someone to Jesus. And it's so fun for me to see you invite your friends. So if you're a friend, welcome. And if you've invited a friend, thank you very much for doing that. It's great to see us love and care for people in Jesus' name. And, there's a couple of different cards you can use. You can use the red ones that say you're invited, the business card size ones, or you can use the ones that are back on the red table, all the different iterations. I found hope, I found peace, I found community, and thank you for inviting people. It's really fun to see folks come out and hear about Jesus. We're going to be starting a new series today. Going to go for the next few weeks on the book of Joel. Joel is a book in the Old Testament. It's a tiny little book, and we're going to be talking about a restoration and a return to the Lord. Just before we get going, just to explain a little bit about Joel, no one really knows who this guy is. He's just labeled as a prophet of God, and we don't really know when he lived. Some people think that because of what he talks about, maybe he was during the time of Joram, because during the time of Joram in Israel, there was a terrible, terrible famine. And you're going to see that this talks about a famine in the worship service today when we read the passage. Some people think it's during the time of Manasseh, because Manasseh was a king in Judah, and he was pretty much the worst. Okay, he turned everybody away from God. He sacrificed his children to foreign gods. He was not a good guy. But we really don't know. But what we think is that it was definitely during the time that the temple was still around, because he talks about the priests and he talks about sacrifice. So there is a range, and we think it was before the people went into exile. And his purpose is to call people that had straying very far away from God to come back to God. And his message is the focus of the disaster that happens in our lives and all around us when we're disconnected from God spiritually. That's his focus. And the hope that we can have of being reconnected to God. Now, what he talks about is a lot of the external circumstances of when we stray away from God. He talks about the evil effects that happen both in our own hearts and in our community. And he wants us to see that all these bad things are really just a foretaste of ultimate disconnection with God. That's what he wants us to see. And he wants us to see, and this is very important for us to see, that evil is not just out there. It is, right? Evil is not just out there. But here's the really tricky thing. It's really in our hearts as well. And what's weird is that maybe it's just me, okay? But what's weird is that we don't always think about the evil in our own hearts. We don't always think about the disconnected that we have with God until something bad happens. And then we go, whoa, wait. Either it's because we finally realize that what we were doing isn't going to work out, or because bad things start happening to us and we start waking up and say, oh my gosh, what's going on? And we realize that our joy has left the building. And we say, what is happening to us? In fact, we don't ever want to talk about bad things. We don't want to bring that up. No one really wants to talk about a disastrous, disconnected from God spiritually that we start seeing in horrible things in our community, in our own lives. No one wants to talk about that, right? Do you want to get up and talk about that? Did you get up this morning and say, I would like to talk about the disaster of being spiritually and situationally disconnected with God? No. We don't want to talk about it. But the fact is that we all need to realize that we need divine deliverance at one place or another. We never want to face evil. I don't. I just went to a beautiful country in the Dominican Republic. And it was so crazy because we're in this beautiful environment and there's people are snorkeling, we're on the beach, and this was the very last day. We had worked all week and we had worked with orphans. We did community service with them. We handed out gifts to people who are very, very poor. We worked with young ladies. I got the privilege of teaching softball. It was so much fun. Like, I got to go back to my baseball roots. I was like, yes, right? And then we got to this beautiful beach, and people realized that there was sex trafficking going on. Dude, I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want to acknowledge the own lust in my heart. And I couldn't sit there and go, oh, well, I'm not like that guy. No, because I had to face the evil. I had to face what was going on. There was guilt all over that place. There was pain. There was trauma. I didn't want to face it. None of us ever want to face these things. We don't want to look at it. And what Joel wants us to do, and we're going to see this today, Joel wants us to take a good, hard look at the evil of the circumstances of our lives, and he wants to wake us up like sniffing salts, like smelling salts. You know those, right? It like gets you going. I didn't realize this. I looked this up, but you know the NFL uses smelling salts? Just Google it. Smelling salts. You'll see everybody from Aaron Rodgers to Tom Brady. Yeah, Tom Brady, he needs some sniffing salts, right? And even some Chicago Bears, they give them the sniffing salts. Why? Because that stench wakes them up. It gets them to pay attention. You know what? Here's really weird. I'm jazzed about where we're going to go with this message, but I'm going to ask you for your patience as we go through this series, because we're going to continually have to look at the very difficult things a smelling salt to wake us up and get us back in the game, get us back connected with God. It was really interesting. I was reminded of C.S. Lewis, the great apologist from England. During the Second World War, C.S. Lewis was prolific on the radio and writing, and he was an Oxford professor at Magdalen College. And he said this, he said, pain insists upon it being attended to. Right? Pain insists on it being attended to. He said, God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks to us in our consciences, but he shouts to us in our pain. And I don't want to go over pain all the time, but I just want you to know that the reason why we're preaching this, and you can blame the elders, you can blame Matt and Jim and Ryan and Bill, okay? You can blame those guys, because here's what they did. About 6 months ago, we were starting to prepare, what are we going to preach in the next year? And they said, we want you to preach on the whole of the Bible and point us to Jesus. They said, I want you to pick some books that we don't normally visit, and want you to show us from God's Word how we are being led to Jesus. And I picked this book, Joel, and I was like, oh my gosh, when I was reading it this week, I was like, we're going to do this on 4th of July weekend where everyone's been celebrating and having fun, and we're going to talk about hardship and pain. Yes, we are. But what we're going to see is that Joel's an absolutely great place for us to start, to see the story of God's divine deliverance. And I want you to hang with us, okay? Will you hang with us today as we talk about it? And what we're going to see is God is going to paint a picture of famine, okay, of pain, of brokenness and disconnected to God, so that he can ultimately bring us, and this is where we're going to go with, to a table of feasting so that he can reconnect our hearts. Okay, I promise you there's hope. Will you hang with me? You guys ready? And what we're going to see is that God is never, ever absent in calamity and pain, but he's revealing to us a hope for a reconnection with him. That's the message of the whole book. And today, what we're going to see is that Christ is calling us to reconnect our hearts to him again and have him give us the hope of his peace, of his shalom, of his presence, so that even in the worst of times, we can see that God is doing something good and that we have a future hope in Jesus. That starts now today. Steve, thanks so much for some of those songs. Do you guys know the middle song? Was I the only one who didn't know that? It was absolutely brilliant. I wish we could show the lyrics and just show how this is leading us right up to the place where we're going to see that God is active even in the places of pain and even in the places of our guilt and shame. Like sniffing salts, he wants to wake us up and get us back re-engaged with him, okay? So first, we're going to ask a couple questions of the passage when we read it. The first question I want us to ask is, what should we do with the worst of times? What should we do with the worst of times? And the second question, you only get 2 today. I know you wanted 3, Tom. I saw that in your eyes. Okay? The second question is, how do we interpret and respond? Okay? How do we interpret and respond? And we're going to see that everything leads to Jesus. So if you have a Bible, I invite you to open your Bibles to the book of Joel. Joel is towards the middle of your Bible, middle back of the Old Testament. It's a tiny little book. And if you have a Bible, I invite you to open up the book of Joel. We're going to look at it just a few verses at a time, and we're going to take a look at the first chapter. Should have the words up here as we go along. But the first thing I want us to look at is the first couple verses of the book of Joel, and we're going to ask, what should we do in the worst of times? So this is what Joel says. He says, the word of the Lord that came to Joel, son of Pethuel. Hear this, you elders. Listen, all you who live in the land. Has anything like this ever happened in our days or in the days of your ancestors? Tell it to your children. Let your children tell it to their children, and their children to the next generation. And this is where it gets crazy. What the locust swarm has left, the great locust have eaten. What the great locust have left, the young locust have eaten. What the young locust have left, the other locust have eaten. And what he does is he starts painting a picture of absolute disaster, of the calamity that came on God's people and was coming on God's people. It's sort of a both and of when they were disconnected with God. And he's going to look at three groups of people. The first group of people, he just gives an introduction. This is the general group of people. But then he's going to talk about three groups of people. He's going to talk about the drinkers. Those are drinking alcoholic beverages. He's going to talk about the city folk, and he's going to talk about the country folk. Okay, you have to decide which one you are. All right? But he's going to tell them that a total disaster has happened. He wants them to tell it to the old. Did you see he wants to tell the elders? He wants everyone to listen, and he wants to tell it to the young people. He says, this is a picture of total loss. Can you see this? The locusts have come. Do you see in verse 4? What the locust swarm has left. So locusts are like these little grasshopper type animals, the little insects, and they fly in giant swarms. And if you see pictures of them in the Middle East, they literally darken the sky. They just emerge and they come out and they literally eat everything. My kids have been fascinated by watching the monarch butterflies, caterpillars, eat the little milkweed. Is it milkweed? Is that what they eat? And they're like, oh, look, he ate a little bit. And like the whole plant is still remaining. Oh, no, locusts. When they come in, they would just devour the whole plant. There'd be nothing left. And what the picture is the pictures of total disaster. See what he talks about? He talks about the swarm, and then the swarm moves on, then the big locust, the great locust, they eat it, and what the great locusts don't eat, the young locusts have left. And this is the really weird thing. You see, this is the other locust. They don't even know what that means in Hebrew. They have no idea what it means. They're like the other. Like all it is a picture of absolute disaster. And here's the picture. Evil will take everything away. Evil will take everything away if we let it. It is both literally and symbolically a symbol of us being disconnected with God. And he says, listen, I want everyone to pay attention that when a bad thing happens to you, it's symbolic of evil taking everything away from you, and your only hope is to go back to the one that can heal you. Your only hope is the one back who can recreate what the locusts have eaten. If the locusts eat your plant, can you make another plant? Yes or no? No, you cannot. I debated. Can I just, for free. Control, it's not directly in the passage, but I just want to say this to you as your pastor. Control is an illusion. Control is an illusion. And we think that we're in control. There's only one who's in control. It's God. And evil is a picture of chaos. And when it starts coming in, there's very little we can do about it, unless we want to turn back to God. And he's giving us a picture of what it looks like, literally and symbolically, to be turned away from God. And then he starts talking about three groups of specific people that he wants to show as pictures of the chaos of being disconnected with God. And then he starts, I don't think I did it. I put the wrong slide up. Okay, well, let's look at verse 5 through... Did I put it up there? Somebody help me read. Oh, yeah, I did. Okay, good. Okay, I'm having trouble with my contacts. I can't hardly see anything. So if I'm messing up, it's because I'm really struggling to see. I have been visiting the doctor, yes, I'll go back. Okay? All right. So verse 5, I do have to, I like blind. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, look at verse 5. He starts with the drinkers. What does he say to them in verse 5? He says, "Wake up, you drunkards. Wake up and weep. Wail, all you drinkers of wine. Wail, because the new wine has been snatched from your lips." Okay, what's new wine? New wine is where when they first harvest the grapes, they crush the grapes, and when they first begin to make wine, it starts to initially ferment, and it makes like a champagne-like beverage. It's young, it's fruity, it doesn't have a lot of high quality, but if you were interested in drinking alcohol, that's your first chance. Okay? And it was usually a celebratory beverage because the harvest had come in and everything's full. Can't you see it? I was just up in Michigan and I really wanted to pick the cherries, but do you know what had happened? All this rain had kept those cherries from growing, and there were only these tiny little green specks on the tree. There was no harvest for me. And these people, they had nothing. It'd be like going up to Michigan and the locusts had eaten everything. And I show up for the cherry festival. And we're like, "Let's party." And they're like, "No, there's nothing. Look at the trees. They're completely brown." The locusts have eaten everything. And he tells the drinkers, he says, "Wake up and wail, for your new wine is gone." Verse 6, A nation has invaded my land, a mighty army without number. It has teeth of a lion and fangs as a lioness. It has laid waste to my vines and ruined my fig trees. It stripped off their bark and thrown it away, leaving their branches white. And what he does is he paints a picture of even the very people who would use a vehicle to escape suffering, like strong drink, they're out. I mean, the party is really fun until the beer runs out, right? And for these people, have you ever been, this is just going to show my college years or something. Have you ever been to a party and everybody's drinking and then they run out? It's like the greatest catastrophe in the world. And people are like, "Let's drive." No, don't drive. Let's take the keys, right? No, there's no liquor store for them to go to. There is literally nothing there. And God is saying, listen, evil's going to take everything away from you. If you are disconnected with me, even the false joy of inebriating yourself with alcohol to get away from it, or even to think that we're going to have a big harvest, we're going to have a superabundance, we're going to have a little bit of party, get a little bit tipsy and feel fun. He's like, nope. It's going to be gone. Even the very means of escape is going to be taken away from him. And then he goes to times in the city. He says this. He says in verse 8, "Mourn like a virgin in sackcloth, grieving for the betrothed of her youth." Now, what's that all about? Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, has always been likened, and his people, that's you and I, have always been likened to the bride of God. And what he's talking about is the city of Jerusalem, and he likens it to a virgin bride who's waiting for her groom, and he dies before he can come to the wedding. And he likens this, he says, you got to mourn my loss. Mourn the loss. When you see external things of evil that are pointing you like sniffing salts, wake up and realize that I'm your great husband and you desperately want me. And he's saying, listen, you city dwellers, you've got to understand, O Jerusalem, the great bride of God, that everything is falling away because you're disconnected from me. And then he goes on to the priests. He says, priests are in mourning, those who minister before the Lord. Right? He talks about how the fields are ruined, the ground is dried up, the grain is destroyed, the new wine is dried up, the olive oil fails. All of these things, the grain, the new wine, the olive oil, all of these are like the elements of the table of sacrifice. It'd be like showing up today and me saying, I don't have anything to serve you. We got nothing. We don't have anything. And their worship service was dependent on these things. They could not have a worship service. Sometimes I think, David Brooks back there, I just want to say to you, we could not have a worship service without a media booth the way we do it. You guys would all have to adjust. We would not be able to sing the songs. Everything would fall apart. You guys would push through. I know. You would, right? You would sing the songs, wouldn't you? We would try, right? But they couldn't even do it. He's saying, listen, the picture of the disaster is so bad that the priests don't even have the very elements that are required to do a worship service. So the worship service is messed up, right? And if the city folk think that they're doing all right, watch out for you people in the country. Look at what he says in verse 11. Despair, you farmers. These are the country folk. Wail, you vine growers. Grieve for the wheat and the barley, because the harvest field is destroyed. The vine is dried up, and the fig tree is withered. Pomegranate and palm and the apple tree, all the trees of the field are dried up. Surely the people's joy is withered away. The harvest, folks, is completely destroyed. There is nothing left. There's no hope. Everything is withered away. And if you read on, we're not going to read this right now, but he says all the food has been cut off. There's no joy or gladness in the house of God in verse 16. Even the seeds have been shriveled up beneath the clods, and the storehouses are in ruin. The granaries have been broken down, and all the grain is dried up. Oh, how the cattle moan. The herds mill about because they have no pasture. Even the flocks and sheep are suffering. Verse 20, even the wild animals pant because of you. Streams of water has dried up. Fire has devoured the pastures in the wilderness. This is a picture of absolute, total disaster. Can you see it? They went from superabundance, thinking that everything was fine, to having the locust eat everything. And if the locust hadn't eaten everything, then they had nothing left in the storehouse. And they had no provision even for the next year. Do you see that they are in absolute dire straits? And what he's trying to show us is that when you're disconnected from God, both literally and figuratively, there is a disaster that happens to the human soul. And when we look out at our bad circumstances, that is like supposed to be smelling salts to wake us up. And what he does is he then moves from what do you do with disaster? He says what you do with disaster is realize it is symbolic of being disconnected with God, because God is the one who can provide everything. And he takes us to verse 13. Look at verse 13. And again, I told you this is going to be a difficult one, right? Like this is not the happy clappy yippee skippies like you normally get from me. Okay? This is just God's word here, all right? This is what he says. Put on sackcloths, you priests, and mourn. Wail, you who minister before the altar. Come, spend a night in sackcloth, you who minister before my God, for the grain offerings and the drink offerings are withheld from the house of your God. Declare a holy fast. Call a sacred assembly. Summon the elders, all who live in the land, to the house of the Lord your God, and cry out to God. And then in verse 19 he says, to you, O Lord, I call, for fire has devoured the pastures and in the wilderness. He wants us to see that the only solution is seeking God. The only thing that we can do when chaos reigns is to call on God in our calamity. I want you to think about the evil that has touched your life. I want you to think about the disaster that nobody knows about. I want you to think, what in the world can we do about that? Am I loud enough for you guys? I feel like I'm a little quiet today. Steve set me in a somber mood. It's a good thing. Look, the chaos of our lives cannot be controlled. And a lot of times we have to just slow down, we have to look at it for what it is, and we have to say, I can't fix this. I can't fix this. There's nothing I can do. And God says, I'll tell you what you can do. You can. You might not have oil. You might not have new wine. You might not have anything for your worship service. You might not have any resources in your life. You might not have anything at all. You might say, the locust, the swarm, the great, the young, the others, they've eaten everything. For crying out loud, the cattle are lying dead. I don't have any wine. I don't have anything. I don't have any seed for next year. I got nothing. Do you know what you can do? You can call it to God. You can. And he actually tells him to do an interesting thing that we don't normally do. He tells him to put on sackcloth. Do you know what sackcloth is? It's that really rough fibrous stuff that's a rough weave. And when you put it next to your skin, it itches. It doesn't feel good. And he tells them to do something that's really kind of weird from our sensibility. He tells them to deliberately mourn and to put something next to your skin that would make you deliberately feel uncomfortable. So it's like you're matching your environment and say, God, I'm absolutely miserable. I acknowledge it. I don't know what to do about it, God. I'm just going to put on sackcloth and cry out to you because I got nothing. Have you ever felt that way? No, I'm really serious. You know, one of the things that we like is a value of authenticity. Have you ever felt that way? I'll tell you what, when I sat there and I saw the sex trafficking happening live in the Dominican Republic, there was nothing I could do about it, and I was so upset about it. And a few younger team members came to me and they said, you got to do something about it, Pastor. You got to do something about it. Well, I am going to do something about it. We are going to do something about it, okay? But I couldn't do anything about it right then. And so what I just had to do was just grieve. And sometimes I make huge mistakes. Sometimes you make huge mistakes. And all this disaster starts happening. You ever feel like all the wheels are falling off the car at once and you say, how in the world can I go anywhere? God says, just slow down, mourn. The whole thing is disconnected. The world and its brokenness cry out for my redemption. You're experiencing it inside your mind and in your life and the experiences of your heart. Just slow down and try to reconnect with me. And he tells them to literally mourn and wail before him, put on sackcloth. Even the priests put on sackcloth. And then he tells them to do this amazing thing. He says, declare a holy fast. Do you guys know what fasting is? Like, we never do this. I'm tempted to don't raise your hand, but I just want you to think about it. When was the last time you ever heard me call you to a fast as your pastor? That would be exactly, wait for it, never. Why? Because we live in America. And the message that I'm supposed to be preaching to you is one of superabundance. And the way you get out of bad is good. Right? Makes sense, right? The way you get out of bad is good. If you're broke, get more cash. Right? If you're sad, get happy. And what he says, I want you to slow down and I want you to realize that you can fix all this external stuff, okay? But you're never going to really get rid of all the chaos of evil in your life because it comes from disconnect. And he wants us to slow down and deliberately put ourselves in an uncomfortable position, even fasting from things that we think are going to distract us from the pain of our lives. And he says, get back with me. He calls them to this 24-hour deal. This sacred assembly of calling out to God. And he wants us to see that we're calling out to God because we've seen, we tasted, we felt the evil in the world, both of our own guilt and both of the things that we're completely innocent of, and it's just the evil that's out there and things are all falling apart. And he says, go to God. That's the one thing that we can do. And it's so interesting because Brandon Long has been encouraging us to listen to David Platt, and we've done these evenings for the last 2 years. And this past year, David Platt will preach for literally for 6 hours, from 6 o'clock till midnight. And this past year, the focus was on fasting and prayer. And David Platt and Francis Chan sent me a book. When I'm done with it, Brandon, I'll give it to you. All right? Sent me a book, and I'm like, A Hunger for God, Desiring God Through Fasting and Prayer, John Piper. And I'm like, yeah, John, I remember you talked about that at Wheaton College in 1997 when I was there. And I did not read the book. Why? I don't like fasting. Do you? Here's a fun fact. I'm hypoglycemic. When I fast, it makes me feel sick. And the worst part about it is one of my deepest values, and it might be yours, is productivity. And if I'm unproductive because I'm fasting, God, how can I serve you to the fullest? See how vicious that logic is? So I don't fast. That's pretty dumb. Look, I just confessed that before you. That's just dumb. I've been reading this book. You can see I'm most of the way through. I encourage you, if you're up for a good, hearty read. He talks about Jonathan Edwards. He talks about Whitefield. He talks about Cotton Mather and the people in early America and in Great Britain. When they really, really wanted to see God move, they started to pray and fast. And they said, oh, God, will you please heal our nation? Things are so broken, God. God, I don't have anything left. This chaos is out of control. The guilt in my life is too much. The shame of the things that are happening, in our society are too great. God, what am I going to do? He says, call a 24-hour fast. Get everybody together. Start praying. He says, listen, the deal is, people, you need to cry out to me. You've got to come. You've got to come and say, God, we need you. We need you. We need you. Finally, we woke up, some smelling salts. God, we've been living in this illusion that we can control things, and it is out of control, and there's nothing we can do. The locust ate everything. There's no new wine. There's no grain. There's no seed. God, help. And you finally go to God and say, okay, God, come now. Now, here's the thing. You've got to remember that when you start to fast, there's a very big tendency to do something in your flesh, like you think there's a goods and exchange. So like I just would take this, right? And this is my fast. And Alan, you get the great privilege of being the Lord Almighty, right? And I say, oh God, I'm just going to give you this fast. Oh, I'm going to put on that sackcloth. I'm going to pray all night, oh God. And I give that to God, and you say this. You do this right away. Give me back. No. I want it back. All right. Okay. He might need it. That's not the way it works. Okay? The way it works is fasting and prayer is a time where you externally recognize the chaos and the emptiness in your life, the discomfort in your life, in order to internally have God feed your soul. Okay, now I have gone way long. This is so classic for me when I spend a lot of time in a passage. But I want you to see something. The key to the passage is actually in verse 15. Okay? The key to the passage, to understanding what's going on in verse 15, he says, alas, for that day, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like the destruction from the Almighty. Now, what in the world does the day of the Lord have to do with crying out to God? Well, the day of the Lord is when God comes. What God does when He comes, there's one thing He does. He brings justice. He brings justice. Now, that sounds great, right? But He's saying to them, alas, for the day of that day, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. In other words, if you are unjust, if you are unclean, if you are outside relationship with God, that will be your undoing. Because you have become enmeshed and part of and related to the chaos of evil. And this is what the Israelites were starting to wake up to. They wanted God to take out the foreign nations. And they said, God, these bad people have come like locusts. They've taken everything from us. And God said, now wake up. Hold on 1 minute. When I come, you know what's going to happen. You understand what's going to happen. I'm going to have to take care of all of evil. See, this is the thing. A lot of people say, how can there be a good, loving, and just God in the world when evil exists? And you say, okay, well, that's great. What you've done is you've conveniently, we all do it, okay? We all conveniently remove ourselves from evil, stand as someone who is sort of we get to watch it like a Shakespearean aside, like a play. And God says, that's not the way it happens. And so here's the thing. I want you to think about this. All the people of God, including all the religious people, and I say religious, okay? We always think about the coming of God as this vicious judgment thing, okay? But let me ask you a question. If this and all the Bible is about Jesus, okay? What did God do the first time He came in Jesus? Because you know it's talking about the coming of the Lord. And who is the coming of the Lord but Jesus? Does Jesus not say, I am the way, the truth, and the life? There's no way you can get to the Father except through me. He says to His disciples, He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. So when Jesus comes, the first time, the coming of the Lord, what kind of justice and how does He bring that justice? Yes, Spencer. The first coming of the Lord is when God says, look, the chaos in your life, the chaos in your flesh, the chaos in this world is too great. I'm going to take it on myself. I'm going to take all your separation. I'm going to take all your pain. I'm going to take all your guilt, all your shame, and all your hurt. And I am going to come now first to take the judgment and to give you peace and hope. And then finally, the second time he comes, Revelation 19 and following, he'll come and bring the judgment. And there we live in this time where we are in between the day of the Lord. Did you know that the day of the Lord has already started? The day of the Lord has already started. And anytime we see pain, anytime we see suffering, our mindset needs to be, God, I want to come to you. Jesus, I want to come and take all my separation and disconnection from God and put it on you, because that's why you came, to give me a pathway back to you. And Joel is actually foreshadowing that all the story of the Bible and all of your story both leads to Jesus and from Jesus. And we want to see ourselves in Jesus, so that when he finally comes, we find all of our justice and all of our healing in him, so that his wrath and justice will not fall upon us, because we have turned it over to him and he has already borne it. So all there is left for you is the hope and peace of the shalom, the completeness of being in God. Now you live already and not yet. Now, I could get really fancy, and I'm going to get fancy for just a second, okay? He talks about the lack of water in this passage. Do you know that the Holy Spirit, do you lack of water? Do you know that you are supposed to be baptized into the water of God, and he's going to cleanse you? And Jesus says, come to me, all you are thirsty, and I will give you something to drink. And what was he talking about? He was talking about the Spirit of God. Joel talks about that. We're not there yet. I can't help myself. And in this passage, it talks about how fire has burned up. And Jesus says, oh, the baptism that I have to go into, the baptism of fire. He wanted to let the fire of God's wrath pour down, so that when the Spirit of God pours out on you, it becomes tongues of fire. And you begin speaking a message of hope to the nations. And you say, God, I'm found in you. God, no matter what happens in my life, and he says, all of creation groans inwardly as they wait for the sons of God to be revealed in Romans chapter 8. That nothing can separate you from the love of God, not trouble or hardship or famine or danger or nakedness or sword. For in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. Nothing can separate you from the love of God that is found in Christ Jesus. So whatever you're experiencing today, I got to wrap this thing up, okay? Whatever you're experiencing today, I want you to really think about it. I got my own issues. Is that apparent? Whatever disconnection from God you're experiencing today, bring it to him. He is giving you a taste. When you see evil, he's giving you a taste of what the chaos and disconnection looks like. And he says, come back to me, and I want to move you from famine to feast. In just a minute, we're going to come up. I invite the people who are serving communion to come on up. Alan, could you serve with me on this side? So the people who are serving communion can come on up. And what I want to do is I want to transition us so that we would be able to say, okay, God, I'll bring to you all of my brokenness. God, I'll bring to you every area in my life where I feel all the wheels have fallen off. The locusts have eaten everything. There's no party. There's no joy anymore. You got to pick it, okay? This is very personal, but I want us to do it corporately. I know what my thing is. What's yours? I want you to come up, and I want you to say, God, I want to give you my famine. I want to give you my guilt. I want to give you my brokenness. And then I want you to drink in his blood, which is like the new wine, which will heal your soul and cleanse you. And I want you to eat the bread, which is body, which is broken for you, so that he will nourish you and send you in a whole new direction. Okay? In just a second, we're going to invite you up, and we invite you to come from the back rows. The ushers will release you, and take the bread and take the cup and take them back to your seats, and we'll all take them together after we have collected the elements. If you need gluten-free, I believe that they're available for you in both locations. So come and receive the bread and the wine and take it.